wine, hashish, and Molly. It was the first party of the year, and Dean and I had been looking forward to it for weeks. I was especially excited, for one of my favorite artists were playing in one of my favorite clubs, and it would be the first time I attended a show high on anything but weed. I also had never tripped in a public setting before, and in fact always doubted that such a thing would be insurable. I had also never taken Molly before, but it had been at the top of my to-do list for years. I was fascinated by the potential of Molly to break me from my shell. I had heard from friends and numerous online reports about how drastically it could increase sociability, empathy, and sympathy. All things I felt I lacked and wanted so badly when I saw them in others, and secretly, I badly wanted to dance. Music had always moved my soul, but not my body, and I was far too self-conscious to give it an earnest try. Aside from a few white girl comedy twerks, I had never danced, and I privately doubted the ability of Molly to change that. The three of us each had some. Half a gram for me, a gram each for my two friends. I had never seen a chemical so pure before. It wasn't a powder, it was a legitimate crystal. We also rolled out the last of our Afghan hash in a joint to smoke before the show. The club was about a half an hour away, and we left with plenty of time to spare. We parked the car and searched for a place to smoke. We settled at a wonderful, isolated spot behind the venue. The view was gorgeous. We were near a river, and the light from the nearby metropolis twinkled in the ripples of the water. I felt huge. The Afghan mingled with the Molly, and I felt the world ebbing with my breath. I was filled with a familiar sense of peace. I grinned at Dean and said, I think this stuff is stronger than the last. He smiled back. We arrived at the club about 1 in the morning, and I had my first drink of the night. I could feel the high creeping up as we checked our tickets, stood in line, and waited in the coat check line. I was a Molly novice, so it was hard for me to qualitatively describe what the drug was doing to me. It was stronger than my last hit, yes, but still not strong. Probably not even a lime. Nevertheless, I clearly felt under the influence. I felt a fundamental calmness mixed with excitement. A new sort of energy coursed through my body, the sort that I imagined when I heard people speak of channeling energy. The night was off to a great start. I had a second and third drink during the course of the night, and everything was fine. Dean had described the sound as some high school kid who played trap music and made it big somehow, so as he walked onto the stage, I was expecting something like a watered-down future. Luckily, his live show transcended the mixtape, and by the second track, I was sold. Dean was not into the music, while I stood near the back and bobbed my white head. The joy of the crowd should have been infectious, but I felt slightly too awkward to really get into the spirit. We were all dancing and having a great time. I will start my story by saying I am in no way a hash smoker. I've used it only 3 times in my life, and I never really enjoyed the high that much. On this particular night, however, I was drinking heavily, and I was surrounded by very close friends who could all be classified as potheads. Soon after that, I started feeling that a different state of consciousness was starting to settle in, to blend into the slight drunk dizziness I was already feeling. I started some kind of hyper-consciousness. I was extremely aware of every movement, every sound, every look, and every little gesture. There was also some paranoia to it. I started thinking that people had noticed the state I was in and were making fun of me. Then suddenly the feeling changed. I found myself standing in the middle of a dancing crowd and having a bombardment of thoughts and ideas come into my mind. The sensation is difficult to explain. I would have an ID, and then the image would give rise to 5 new ones, and those 5 would equally multiply by 5 until I was unable to keep track of my own thoughts. Of course, none of these IDs made any sense or were attached to reality in any way. It was pretty much a flow of intellectual images. There was logic to them in a certain way, but I think this logic was just an illusion. Unfortunately, I am unable to recall any of the IDs that crossed my mind during those minutes. In fact, even as I was experiencing this, I could remember the IDs after a few seconds. The flow was so fast. I guess there was no space left in my mind to use the memory. This was the weirdest sensation I've ever had in my life. In a way, I wasn't really thinking about anything, but I was thinking about all these exponentially multiplying IDs at the same time, and there was still a little spot in the back of my mind that was watching all this chaos from the outside, recording all these sensations and keeping the real me alive and conscious. One of my friends described it as coming in waves. He'd be high, start to sober slightly, then feel real high again. As the alcohol and THC mingled happily together within the synapses, waves of chemical pleasures altered my brain and perceptual mechanism. The simple task of focusing became literally impossible. I felt that if my eyes stopped moving, I might miss something. And so I sat there for about 5 minutes, shifting my eyes as fast as possible. Never really seeing anything at all. My perception of depth became completely compromised as objects in my retinas were always closer than they appeared. This effect cycled in and out in overwhelming ways that I thoroughly enjoyed. At this point, I lost track of the chronological order of things. I remember bits and pieces, but mostly I remember dancing. According to a text I sent to Tyre, I took my second dose at around 2 o'clock. I was feeling amazing at that point. I could have done anything. I loved everyone there. I could have hugged the world. It wasn't sheer sense of ecstasy or straight up happiness like the name might imply. It wasn't quite euphoric or giddy with happiness, although that was a part of it, and I was pretty happy. I just felt as good as I've ever felt in my life physically, mentally, and everything else, and I wanted to dance. Everywhere I looked, I am surrounded by smiling people. There are no cliques. Every group is wide open. At the end of each song, everyone on the floor is hugging and kissing one another. I've never been to anything like this. The room is about to explode with love. I can see my beliefs reflected on so many faces, and the faces where I see as we lock eyes and we just know we are connected. We are one, and it is all so beautiful. I never want this to end. Throughout these glorious minutes, I laughed ceaselessly at the fact that we as humans are conditioned to believe that such experiences are evil and sure to be avoided. Nobody can tell me what I felt was wrong, evil, negative, detrimental, or bad in any sense of the words. I was where I wanted to be forever. I became very aware that my usual valid self consciousness was slowly being dismantled. This process became oddly tangible as bricks of my shield were smashed away by rushes of THC and its alcoholic sidekick. I really enjoyed not being bothered with the complications of conscious thoughts. My brain was existing in the pure and quintessential form, and I loved it. I said anything I felt and I did anything I wanted to. I remember the first instance that I knew I was rolling, and that was it. My jeans rubbing against my legs as I moved felt good in a way nothing had ever felt good before. like a magical, perfectly soft fabric, rubbing along the smoothest skin, and at that instant, the other effects of the drug began to fill me. The music took on wonderful new qualities where before the music had seemed almost too loud. I now relished in the volume. My senses were hungry for everything, and I devoured the lights, the now beautiful clothing and movements of those around me and the music. I had the thought some months before while listening to a sprawling odd-taker tune while on 2CB that psychedelics didn't just improve music but totally altered it. It was like software running on different hardware, like it pushed separate and previously unknown switches, and Molly is similar, I think. I didn't simply begin to enjoy more of the music I had been hearing, it took on a brand new quality. I could feel the pounding bass shake my body, but it resonated throughout every part of me. I was like a starving man and the music was my feast, and I danced. My inhibitions were wiped away at once, but it wasn't just that. It was like I knew just how to dance. Like I'd always known, but I had never embraced it until now. One of my greatest fears I had about dancing had been that I simply didn't know how. That night, I learned how easy it was. I didn't have to know what to do, I just did it. My body, the music, and the drug cooperated to make my movements virtually unconscious. The urges of movements that had leaped from my depths whenever I listened to good music were finally exercised. I moved my feet, my hips, my arms. I just did what my body told me to do. Suddenly I became very loving. I began feeling one of my female friends who had been lounging in my lap. I felt so close to her, so amazingly connected. I had no previous interest in this girl, and it was then that I realized that she looked a heck of a lot better than usual. I opened my eyes about 6 or 7 minutes later and realized that I had forgot to finish the end of a blink. I have actually forgot to open my eyes. I realized that when my eyes were closed and I just absorbed the energies and sounds that were filling the room, my high was a lot more enjoyable. My friend Dean had a blue camouflage outfit on and was gallantly screaming some Chris Brown lyrics. The very visualization made me laugh harder than I've ever laughed before. The hashish and Molly had peaked and the music was warm, familiar, and childlike. My dancing became more varied. But more importantly, I had fallen in love with my movements. There was nothing I thought that I would rather be doing at that moment. Not content to stay in one place, I started dancing in circles. We still had a little bit of hashish left and we all took 2 or 3 hits from Dean's one hitter. The hashish brought back some of the feelings that I had earlier, but I felt like it augmented the wine more than landmark. The marijuana that Dean obtained is extremely strong, and one of my very experienced friends mentioned before that it may be laced with another drug. It was until the end of the third one, where I attempted to keep the smoke in my lungs for a very long time, did the trip begin to turn nasty. My mind seemed to be playing tricks on me too, trying to find something to distract me. I tried reading. world was moving backwards and forward. When I reached my friend, the whole world seemed to be stuck in some sort of small loop where he would keep asking me how I am going. I couldn't feel my body at all. I could tell that my body was walking and I could feel my feet touch the ground, but I couldn't feel my own weight. I also couldn't feel my hands or face. When people started to tell me that something was wrong with me, they immediately asked what was wrong with me and were crowding around me. The problem was that when people talked, it seemed to really hurt me. I asked them to all leave me for a while, but look over me as we were in a strange place with many drunk people looking to start a fight. And I really didn't want to be hurt. I had experienced a bad trip before, and I told Dean I experienced an ego death, which he later told me was an ego freedom. After repeatedly telling myself that I was fine and that I was on drugs and it would all be over in the morning, I became a little bit more relaxed. My pulse was still very, very high, and my breathing was heavy. Then we had to start moving as my friends still wanted to party and the night was young. We walked up to the balcony and stayed there for a while to wait for some other people. I had been trying to combat the effects of the drugs until here by pacing. It seemed that when I would stay still, the sounds and visuals would get worse. I decided to just let go and try and relax and let the drugs do what they want, until I was pointed out from my friend that I was rotating my body around very largely. So I snapped out of it and we moved on to the person's house. The visual disturbances have died out now, and I go to get my coat from the coat check several times. At each time I pause and look back, only to find myself slowly beginning to dance and flowing back onto the floor. I smoke a joint but don't really notice any change in my state. While we were walking to the person's house, things were starting to seem like a video game. The people close to me were closer layers, and the things far away were like a static background that did not move. I took a sip of Pinot as it was the only liquid I could get a hold of until we found the person's house. I had terrible cotton mouth. When we arrived at the person's house and I had water, I felt much better. I sat down on a chair, and this is where I had started to calm down a bit and started to enjoy the trip after a while of getting used to my new optic cameras. I could start to enjoy them. The best thing was people coming up to me. My perspective on the world was completely funky. Everything looked like they were in one of those fun house mirrors. When people got too close, really cold. Sounds were also really strange. When people were talking on either side of my head, they seemed to be soft and slow, then really fast and loud, then slow and soft again. Another strange thing is that when I would close my eyes, I would sort of have a daredevil vision. I could see the sounds people were hearing through my eyelids. It was now about 5 o'clock. This was where things are going to get a little fuzzy. All that I remember of the night is like a dream, and it is hard to tell the order in which things happened. I remember that I felt higher than I had in a while. The feeling was somewhat like I was dissociated from the world around me, kind of like it feels on DXM, just not as sick to your stomach. I could feel most of my body, but at the same time I didn't really feel like it was there. My mouth was very dry, so I think at some point I got another drink. I charged my phone and checked my timeline. Not many people were on and I didn't remember doing anything. Thoughts were randomly flowing through my head. I wasn't completely sure I was doing it. It was if all my thoughts were in third person. Like I was reading or dreaming everything that was happening. Something made me want to have another glass. I got a bottle, opened it, started drinking. I think this is when my ex approached me. She followed me here. It felt like she was fucking with me. Like she knew perfectly well that I was fucked up and she was doing this for entertainment. But she was only an ex. Not sure what time it is now, but this is when I started feeling sick. Damn lazy to stand, so while sitting on the sofa I began to feel dizzy. I really felt like I had to get up, but I couldn't. So I sat for who knows how long, thinking of how dizzy I was. I became even more aware that I was thinking in the third person. I finally got up and went to the kitchen to get a drink. Some sort of a lime drink that didn't taste all that bad. Had 2 glasses and went into the bathroom. I kept the lights off. Maybe it would keep the dizziness under control. I closed my eyes and put my head down, losing track of time. Eventually I began to feel nauseous. I got up and vomited into the sink. It burned like hell, and much of it shot out of my nose. I sat back down on the toilet trying to clear my nose. At last I did again feel somewhat better, but very tired and still pretty dizzy, as if the world was spinning. I then remembered I put some hash, rolling papers and tobacco in my jacket pocket. I went back to get them. I walked upstairs, skinned up and went back to the sofa. I must have been away for a while, as most of the people have left. The last time I looked at the clock, somewhere between all of it was about 6:20. My mouth was feeling very dry, so I got a glass of tap water. That tap water tasted so fucking amazing. It was like liquid gold. My hand-eye coordination did not seem to be impaired. But then again, it's not normally spectacular. Someone came out and started playing this electric guitar on a tiny amp, and it sounded awesome to me. The music just seemed to flow. 2 leftover people took a couple more dabs, but I abstained. I was still rolling from my last one. The interesting flavor was wearing off, and it was once again beginning to taste unpleasant. I took a few sips of someone's Bacardi Coke concoction. I got back to my home somehow. I put on my iPod and listened to 2 songs by the band Schleck, which sounded quite nice. It was like the sound was alternating nicely between my ears. I went to sleep around 10 a.m. and woke up at noon feeling fine. I was groggy and had a headache for the entire day. I was glad that I Being high like this is not what I expected. I had thought that I'd get more positive, fuzzy, warm feelings. I had expected to be giddy and euphoric, maybe contemplative. I didn't get any of that and instead felt very detached and dissociated. The time warp was weird and unexpected. I'd call my experience weird, but not good or pleasant exactly. I will probably do it again. The experience is now burned in my mind like a dream. Throughout the night I remembered having what seemed to be pretty messed up experiences, but I can't remember any details, and it's like it was all blended into the night. This is pretty much how my memory is, and it's not a problem. I smoke hashish pretty frequently now and have done ecstasy almost every other week for the past few months, and occasionally taken coke. Very, very rarely do I drink wine. Everything that happens to me, everything I say and do is somewhat of a dream to me. I can remember things that happened, just not in very much detail or the chronological order of the events. I like it though. I may do this again sometime. Minus the wine after I smoke. No time is ever as good as the first. Hope this was useful for anyone else.